Pass from Pacific, no shot able to come away. Jensen wants the change, and Noah Jensen with a missile will open the scoring here. Jensen, who's known to drop the hammer from distance.
Welcome to September, and welcome back to the CPL Newsroom presented by Volkswagen. Charlie O'Connor-Clarke alongside Mitchell Tierney. We are sort of on location today at the Canadian Premier League office in Toronto. I got the better backdrop than Mitchell, who is in a cubicle, so his sound quality might be much better. But either way, we welcome you back. I know it's been a couple of weeks since we last saw you all, and I know that it's been a long weekend. I hope you all enjoyed. But today we are going to do something a little bit different than usual as we enter the last 6 weeks of the Canadian Premier League's regular season. We've got a lot on the line left. We've got a tight title race. We've got a playoff race. So what we are going to do today is we're going to start at the bottom of the table and work our way up and just do a bit of a roundup on each of the 8 CPL teams, team by team, where they stand, how their season's gone so far, and what they need for the last 7 or 8 games, depending on the side, to be successful and see this year as a triumph. But obviously, we had 4 more games over the weekend in match week 21. They were all a lot of fun. We had a doubleheader Friday night. If you weren't aware, I hope you were, though. Forge FC 2, Pacific FC 0, Captain Noah Jensen with the brace for Pacific in that one. Later that afternoon, or evening, Cavalry 2, Valor 2. If you didn't see that, it was a lot of fun. 15 minutes in the second half, saw Cavalry go up 2-0 with set pieces. Valor responded with 2 set pieces of their own to get that draw. Followed by Saturday, Atletico Ottawa 1, Vancouver FC 0. And then finally, another Labor Day classic in the Maritimes, Halifax Wanderers 2, York United FC 1. So let's bring up the standings right now and take a look at where we stand as we enter September. Again, as I said, 6 weeks left in the regular season. That's it. We are close. But Forge FC leading the way at the moment. 21 games played, 38 points. Followed by Atletico Ottawa in second with 36 points. Cavalry in third with 34. York United with 32. And a bit of a gap to 5th place. Vancouver FC have 26 points. They're in the final playoff spot. Followed up behind by Valor FC on 20. And then Valor on 21. Pacific on 20. Halifax also on 20, but behind on the tiebreakers and at the bottom of the table, which is, in fact, where we're going to start this week. Mitchell, Halifax won yesterday, or whenever you're listening, Monday on Labor Day. A really, really important win for them being back home. I know they've had some tough spells on the road recently, but a decent draw against Atletico Ottawa in their return home last week. Win against York on Labor Day. Mitchell, they are at the bottom of the table. Let's start with Halifax and kind of what the problems have been with them this season. What have been some of their challenges that you've noticed, and what do you make of kind of the first 20 games of their season?
I mean, you mentioned it there. The road form has certainly been probably the glaring issue. They have just one road win, the only team in the Canadian Premier League to have won only one match away from home this Canadian Premier League season. So obviously that isn't conducive to success again when, as we've talked in the past, their home record hasn't been quite as good. They're now, I think, 7 straight undefeated at home. So that's something to build on, certainly. But, it's not last year where they were setting records at the Wanderers grounds or anywhere near. So that's been a real issue. And then just in attack, like they lead the Canadian Premier League in expected goals this season by a pretty significant margin. I think it was 33.79 to 27 or so for Atletico Ottawa. So, they're creating a lot of the chances, but they've only scored 26. So really just not enough consistency from their main attackers, between Telfer and Farron, need to get someone like Sean Rea going as well. There just hasn't been the goal support there. And then I think just, they are susceptible to those moments, those key moments in matches where, again, you've had all these chances, you're creating a lot, and then you just switch off for one moment defensively, or, score an own goal, or, we've seen them, try and play it back to their goalkeeper on a few occasions and it's gone awry. Like, there's just been these mistakes that were maybe uncharacteristic of them last season and, are normal for a young team, but there's been too many of them over the course of the season for them to, really pick up any consistency or results. And again, half your games are away from home. So if you're winning just one of those on the season, like finding any sort of rhythm in longer stretches, it just isn't going to happen. So that's probably a big thing that they have to work on as they move forward here.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, one win away from home, just 4 points total. That's half of what the second worst away record is, and that's Pacific with 8 points. Maybe speaks to how decent Halifax's home form has been, that they've got 16 points at the Wanderers grounds, but still not good enough to make up for how much trouble they've had on the road. As you mentioned, the goal scoring, I mean, it's also, I don't think, ever an ideal situation when your center back is your leading scorer. Dan Nimick has 8 goals, and Dan Nimick is technically in the Golden Boot race. He's one off the top, but that is almost all penalties, I think, from Nimick. So definitely just not enough consistent goal scoring. They've kind of tried a few different things at the striker position, as you mentioned, whether it's Ryan Telfer coming in or Thiago Coimbra, but nobody's been able to be healthy for long enough, I think, to play in that role. And I think a lot of it has come down to nobody's gotten in a rhythm really anywhere in that side, which has been unfortunate. It's been a bit of a disjointed year for them, but Mitch, we've talked to them a little bit before. Last year things were so successful in Halifax, joint second in a league on points after missing the playoffs the year before. Patrice Geyser's first year, incredible, made the playoffs, everything. This year they knew that the expectation had been set. The bar was where it was from last year, and they maybe had to temper expectations a little bit, knowing that things came together a little faster than they expected last season. How much do you think this season has been down to managing those moments, or maybe letting some of that pressure get to them at times? And I mean, how much is just these defensive lapses at times, and just like I don't know. It's hard to diagnose what exactly the trouble is with Halifax after we saw them be so good last year.
Yeah, I think it's just a combination of a lot of those things. Like you said, the kind of external and internal pressure to match what they were able to do last season, and then the further you get away from that as the season progresses, and it took them so long to earn their first win of the season, and then once you get that, you're already starting at the bottom, and it's really hard to climb off the bottom of a table, because again, you're always chasing. Every time you get a win, it's like, okay, we're maybe one closer to the team above us, but you almost need 2 wins to every one for any other team, sort of thing, to really start moving up the table, and they just haven't been able to do that. So yeah, I just think it's a combination of different factors that we've seen all year coming out of Halifax that have contributed to this. And the good news is I do think that they still have it in them. There's still clearly the talent there where they can go on a run here. And we saw that certainly against York, like when they're at their highest. I think arguably they probably have the highest ceiling of any of the teams currently outside of the playoffs, or including Vancouver FC, like kind of in that bottom 4.
Yeah.
But they're maybe the most inconsistent of those teams as well. Like the consistency of when we see their best is almost like once a month at this point. So that needs to be obviously changed if they're going to make the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, last year it took them until game 9 for their first win, and we know how that year ended. This year took till game 10, but even after that first win, they weren't able to maybe go on that run and put it together. But as you mentioned, I believe 6 points out of the playoffs at the moment as it stands. Yeah, 6 points behind Vancouver FC, level on points with Pacific, 1 behind Valor. So, and they have a game in hand as well. The other thing to keep track of with Halifax, though, is the under 21 minutes. They have a lot of work to do there, and I think they'll definitely be hoping for some serious contributions from Thiago Coimbra, Jefferson Alphonse, maybe another game or 2 for Aiden Rushanes, because we've seen what he can do against Forge as well. But, a lot of work for Halifax to do over the next 7, 8 games for them because they do have that game in hand. Speaking of which, the other team with a game in hand is Pacific FC in 7th place. And Mitchell, this is a team that has been in second this year as recently as match week 10. They just can't put the ball in the net. Is that kind of the fair distillation of the issue with them at the moment?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, 4 straight losses now. The only team in the Canadian Premier League to be winless in their last 5. Like, the positive for them maybe in being out of the Canadian Championship is now they're all in on this race to the playoffs. They don't have any more big fixtures against the Vancouver Whitecaps that they need to worry about. That might be, taking their attention is kind of sounds funny, and obviously those were massive games for their club, but at the same time, like, fully focus on getting above that playoff line. Like, there's been some positives. Emil Gazdov has been fantastic recently. I mean, really keeping them in games. Nearly stole them a point in Calgary a couple weeks back, but as the story's been all this season, like you said, they just don't have the run support to back any of that up, and their goal scoring numbers remain abysmal. Like we were talking before, and they're on pace for potentially the worst offensive season in the Canadian Premier League. That was 21 goals scored by the Halifax Wanderers, I think, in the league's inaugural season, 2019. And they sit at just 14 right now, with those 8 games remaining, as they also have the game in hand. Like, they'd probably get there, I think. Moses Dyer is looking better. And obviously, he's made his first start now. But is that going to be enough to get them anywhere close to the playoff hunt at this point? It's hard to say. This is a team really that, like you said, since match week 10, it's been a bit of a free fall.
Yeah, their last goal was on August 2nd. That's a month ago. The last time they scored more than 1 goal in game was June 14th. That was a 3-2 win at Valor. And I think that kind of says enough that this is a team that either can't find the chances in the box. There's not as much width, I think, as there was last year. There's no Kikuta Mane. Josh Hurd's been in and out of the lineup. He sometimes provides some of that width. There's a little bit more, kind of turning backward when the ball gets out wide, or trying to play back to the middle. And that's just not where they've been able to find those outlets. And then, it has been a bit of a thankless job for guys like Rion Moore or Dario Zanata or whoever is playing up front as a striker. Either they get very isolated playing up top on their own, or they have to drop deep and go in search of touches, which in itself, leaves you with a hole up front, because then there's no target, there's no spear point to your attack. So it's been difficult, but to be fair, as you mentioned, the defensive record is good. Emil Gazdov has been excellent for most of this year, and a true, archetype of the Canadian Premier League development story. A guy who signed for this club as, I think, a 17-year-old, went on loan to Germany, started getting into the starter's job last year, had some tough games. It wasn't great. Wasn't a great season for him at the start, but he kind of worked through it. And this year he has been excellent. And the defense in front of him has been good too, which, maybe even better than we might have expected, considering they lost Amir Didic in the offseason. But Thomas Meyer-Jaguar has been very, very good. Pacific are tied for the second fewest goals allowed in the league, tied with Forge, who we're not going to get to in this podcast for a very long time because they're at the top of the table. So there are obviously good things about this club, and we've seen that they can play that defensive structure. But James Merriman kind of even mentioned it himself last week, I believe. He was kind of asked about why they'd been maybe starting to leak a few more goals. And he said, well, we decided to maybe change the way we wanted to play, try to go in search of more goals. And in doing so, had to sacrifice some of that low block. And I don't know necessarily if it's worked, because they haven't found really many more goals. So I'm wondering if we see in the next few weeks a return to that basic foundation, especially if Moses Dyer can get a little bit more form under him and start scoring. He very nearly scored against Forge on Friday as well. So maybe that is the catalyst for Pacific, who obviously, as we know, and you've said it before, Mitch, if they get there, they can make noise. Even last year, they kind of limped into the playoffs and went on quite an impressive run. They beat York and then Halifax and had a go of it against Cavalry, but it has to happen quickly. Again, 6 points out, still have the game in hand, but definitely been frustrating at times, and haven't quite yet found the attacking answers. up to Valor FC, who found one attacking answer this past weekend, and that was from a corner kick twice. And it was kind of a spectrum of what the set piece can be in this sport, because Cavalry score those two very intricate, creative set pieces that we know they can. And then 5 minutes later, Valor score two classic Sean Deitch, whack it in the box kind of set pieces, and they were awesome. we always love one of those classic set pieces corners. But Valor, 5 points out of the playoffs. Mitch, what do you make of them? Because they've been a very interesting team this year, and as always, I think under Phil Dos Santos, difficult to beat.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because only 1 point separates them from the bottom of the table right now in the standings. Yeah. But considering how well they've played recently, and adding a point that they earned from behind against Cavalry this past weekend, I think that there's a lot to like about this Valor team right now in terms of how they've been finding form. I think they have some difference makers that they certainly didn't have last year. You look at a guy like Temi Antonoglu, leading the Canadian Premier League in assists is the first example, but Jordan Swivel leading the line, Diogo Resurrecao, Safo Mala, a healthy Raf Ohin, which can't be underrated at all in terms of the stability he's brought in the center of the park is the captain of that team. There's just more substance to this Valor team this season that is really building them up for the run-in. And, we've been waiting all year for this kind of end of season stretch where they have 6 of their final 8 games at home. And now it's just up to them to take advantage of those and, to bring that energy each and every game where everyone else in the league is going to be traveling coast to coast and going to be tired and playing in these brutal matches. And they're the ones who can sit and wait and allow other teams to kind of come to them and come into their home and not have to put on that mileage as much. So it's setting up rather nicely for Valor to go on a bit of a run here. But of course, again, they do still have those 5 points of separation between them and the top of the table. They're still overcoming, that brutal run to start the year away from home. Yeah. But the conditions are really good for this Valor team right now to have a really strong run in and obviously push for their first ever Canadian Premier League postseason position.
Absolutely. I mean, as you mentioned, this is the perfect time for them to get in a rhythm. They only have to go on the road 2 more times. Of September 13th and October 13th. They go to York and then to Vancouver a month apart. Everything else is at home. They play every team once. Things are setting up quite well for Valor, and especially because, I speak about getting in a rhythm. They've been very consistent in terms of who they've been able to put on the pitch recently. In their last 5 games, 11 players have started at least 4 of them. And nobody has missed a game through injury. 9 knocking on wood. Sorry, Phil. 9 players have started all of their last 5 games. Dante Campbell missed 1 with suspension. Temi Antonoglu missed 1 with suspension. Other than that, it's been the same across the board, the same structure. And I think that's been really, really good for them. They're a team that has gone through injuries at times, went through a lot of injury troubles last year. But when you're a team that has had quite a lot of turnover in the offseason, things like that, there's no better thing for a coach than to be able to put the same players on the pitch week in and week out. I think that's helped a lot. You've mentioned some of the players that have been contributing, like Temi Antonoglu, for me, is probably in the conversation for player of the year at this point. It probably belongs up there, especially if he can help Valor get into the playoffs. But what, Mitchell, do you think needs to, what extra level do you think they can get to or need to get to in their last 7 games to push them over the edge? Again, playing every team 1 more time, so much of it at home. Where is that last little thing going to come from to overcome that 5-point gap?
Yeah, I think it's, kind of the usual Valor issue, which is they just need to find some kind of consistent goal scoring and from different players. You obviously, you look at a guy like Sean Hundal, who we know can score goals in this league. Can he be kind of that secondary goal scorer behind a Jordy Swivel? Can, one of the other wingers or attackers, can a Loic Quemi, who's a player who's shown some flashes, contribute a few goals here? Can one of the midfielders, who are more defensively generally allocated, contribute a few goals? Abdul Banate has been a really nice story for them this season, a Canadian under-21 player. Can he continue to press on and find some more goals? I think they've found a defensive structure here that's really working for them, and they're going to limit opposing teams to maybe 1 or 0 goals, I think, in most matches at home, but it's whether or not they can go out. You look at that Vancouver game as an example, they're held to 1-1 for most of that game, and Vancouver's able to get a late one and win it. If they take more of their chances, they could have put that game away earlier, and they don't even have to worry about, dropping 1 point, if not all three. So, or 2 points, if not all three. So I think that's really going to be the difference maker for Valor, as has kind of been the case in their history.
Yeah, it's about putting those games to bed. I think, you score a goal, you need to make sure that the next 20 minutes after that are managed. That Vancouver game is definitely one that's going to haunt them if they don't make the playoffs, especially considering that's the team that they're chasing in the standings, because it is it's a tough goal to give up. I mean, it's a great step from Ayman Salouf, but you never want to give up a goal like that, especially after you've equalized not so long ago. But again, Valor, certainly one of the more interesting teams to watch in the last couple of months. As I mentioned, in better form at home. They've only lost 2 of their last, I think, 7 games and 3 wins in there. So certainly a team to watch with a lot of motivation to make that first ever playoff appearance. The team standing in the way of that at the moment, though, Vancouver FC, last year finished 7th place, currently in 5th. If the playoffs started today, they would be making their first appearance in the postseason in just their 2nd year as a club. But Mitch, things have been quite up and down for Vancouver. Sometimes very good. Sometimes they go out and score a load of goals. Sometimes they go out and concede a load of goals. What do you make of them in year 2 in the Canadian Premier League?
Yeah, I think for me, the reason they're above the playoff line is they've kind of won the big games this year. And what I mean by that is
they beat Pacific.
Yeah, exactly. But which is part of it. But they have 7 wins this year. Only one of them is from those teams above them in the table, that being against Forge away. And then they have 6 wins against the 3 teams below them. And, again, those are the kind of 6-pointers that we always talk about in terms of you look at how close Valor. I think actually Valor would have passed them if Valor beat them in that game a couple weeks ago.
That's right.
But instead they Vancouver's able to get that win and create a little bit more of that separation. They've got the head-to-head tiebreakers if that comes into effect on both Pacific and Valor as well. So they've really taken care of business in those critical matches, which is kind of why they're where they are. Obviously, they have to figure out things defensively. Second most goals conceded, most shots on target faced. Callum Irving has bailed them out a lot this season, and it's 2 seasons in a row where that's been a significant issue for this team. So it's clearly something that they need to figure out. It again, especially in these games late in the year where they're going to be close. Other teams are not going to give you much. So if you're giving away opportunities, they're probably going to take them. At the end of the day, I think if they can make the playoffs this year, it's a pretty good step forward for them in their 2nd season. Obviously, their ambitions were to aim higher at the start of the year, but I think their record against the top teams speaks for itself in terms of they're still off of that, but they've shown well against the teams kind of in that playoff race enough to consider themselves in a good spot to finish above that line.
Yeah, I don't think there's any team happier about the head-to-head tiebreaker this year than Vancouver FC. They've only got 3 games left at home, but they have been one of the better sides in the league in terms of away form this year. They've got more away points than Forge, actually, so they're 4th in that capacity, which is impressive. Good for them. But again, as you mentioned, I think looking for that consistent goal scoring, Alejandro Diaz is in the Golden Boot race. He's got 8, and they've got, I think, 3 players with 4 goals as well. So they're getting a little bit of secondary scoring. Ayman Salouf, I think, is the big wild card for me in this group. He seems to be quite newly rejuvenated and motivated. He seems a little bit happier now that he's in this Vancouver side, and we'll see him continue getting up to speed with that group, playing more, making a bigger impact. And I think that could be, a storyline to watch if he is able to add that, inject that little bit of energy into this side and push them over the line. Mitch, anything else on Vancouver? They have had, some turnover this year from last year. Things have come together very quickly. They started the year very well. What maybe concerns or things would you like to see addressed in the last few weeks that might make the difference between them making or not making the playoffs.
Yeah, I think they're one of those teams where we talked about Valor, but just kind of finding a consistency of shape and lineup for them over the last few. Figuring out those players that are ready for these big moments and these big matches, which, the last 7 games of the season are absolutely going to be for this club, because obviously there's a big chasing pack for them right now, in terms of the 3 clubs we've already talked about, who will all be absolutely desperate to rip that final playoff spot away from them. So yeah, I think it's about finding that. It's about relying on those players and just trusting that those guys can be the ones to get you above that line come the end of the campaign.
100%. It is going to be tooth and nail. I think it's going to come right down to the very end of the season. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I genuinely don't know who it's going to be. Vancouver play Halifax in Halifax, and then Valor at home in their third and second last games of the year before they finish things off in Ottawa, which I think they'll want to. They'll probably hope to have sewn things up by beating Valor the week before, because going into TD Place on the final day of the season, needing a result to clinch a playoff spot would be tricky, especially for an Ottawa team, as we'll get to, which may yet be looking for a regular season title on that day. But we'll see. We will see. Very, very exciting over the next few weeks. That is the bottom 4 in the Canadian Premier League. It does seem increasingly like we do have a bottom and a top 4 at the moment, but we move into the top 4 and the teams that are in the hunt for the regular season title and a CONCACAF Champions Cup spot, beginning with York United, who only a few weeks ago finished the weekend in first place. They are now in 4th, 6 points back of Forge FC in first. Mitch, York have had a very, very interesting season. Obviously, a coaching change in early June, went on an absolute tear under Benjamin Mora. Maybe evened out a little bit more recently, but still playing quite well. Just what do you make of York at the moment and their belonging in this top 4 conversation?
Yeah, I mean, they had that brush with the top of the table, but the hardest thing after that is to stay there, because everyone is kind of gunning for that position, and doesn't get much tougher after going to the top of the table than, hosting the likes of Forge and Cavalry and then going away to Halifax. Like, it's been a bit of a difficult schedule for them recently. I think the big question right now for them is in attack. It's gone off a bit of a cliff over the past few weeks. I think it's 5 straight matches now where they've scored 1 or fewer. Brian Wright, the league leading goal scorer, missing through ankle injury, not expected to be out for too long, but still a miss. And, a lot of the guys recently who have been kind of that key over the last little bit have gone a little quiet. So I think probably just the growing pains of a team that vaulted up the standings so incredibly quickly. But you mentioned kind of the top 4 and the bottom 4. They have a pretty big game coming up for them this weekend against Vancouver FC, because as of right now, they've got that nice 6-point cushion between them and Vancouver, but lose that, all of a sudden it's 3, and it's getting a little bit tighter than certainly they'd like to that playoff line, or at least the 5th position. I think for York right now, hosting a first ever playoff game should be the absolute minimum expectation, with where they're at. And I think they're absolutely good to do that. But, I think this group still has the potential to keep pressing. I mean, we mentioned the 6-point gap to Vancouver. It's also 6 points to the top of the table. So they're as close to that race as well. So again, just their 3rd loss this weekend in 16, I think, since Mora took over. They've been remarkably consistent. A little dip was always expected, but there's more than enough in this group to still be very much considered a part of this title race.
Yes, absolutely. One thing I do look at in the last few weeks is to see if Frank Stirring can come back and be healthy. That would be a big concern if not. Although Niall Higgins has done an admirable job in his stead in the last couple of weeks, as has Noah Batney. Obviously, he's been incredible for them all year. Probably a candidate for best under 21 player this season. But as you mentioned, I think they need to get Brian Wright back in there quick. They need him scoring again. He hadn't scored in either of the 2 games before that either, but he remains the Golden Boot leader. And until this weekend, he was the league's assist leader. So he's a player that you need in your lineup if you're York. He's been so important to them, especially in the counterattack and transitional moments of play. And they're a team that has actually done quite a good job, to me this year, interestingly, of incorporating players, whether those are players that missed a lot of time at the start of the year and with injury and have come in, guys like even Elijah Atakubi, Juan Cordova, Oswaldo Leon, or even the new players that have come in. I mean, Jorge Guzman has been excellent since he's come in, as has Santiago Marquez has started to get his feet wet. He got his first start in Halifax on the weekend. But Mitch, are you seeing York in a process of figuring out their identity, or are you starting to see the signs of what this club is under Benjamin Mora and that kind of identity is coming together already?
I think it's still probably a work in progress, if anything. Like, I do think, I think it came together a lot quicker than they were expecting in terms of the basic shape and just results, obviously, above anything else, that they were able to go quickly. And then those next steps when you play a club for the second time under Benjamin Mora, or the third time, like, then you're not surprising anyone anymore in the same way. And then kind of they need to progress a step further here, and that will take time. But again, with the way they were able to so quickly adapt to the different ideas and different positional tweaks under Benjamin Mora, and the way he was able to implement them and see so many players in maybe different roles than we expected, and to have them thrive in those positions. You mentioned Elijah Atakubi certainly is probably the top one of that group. Juan Cordova probably being the other one as a midfielder. Yeah. I think, again, that there's a lot to be optimistic about for York United, not only this season, but in seasons to come, in terms of the foundation they're really building on here.
Absolutely. And as we mentioned, just as far from the top of the table as they are from the 5th place position, really could go anywhere. And a York team that has been crucially very, very good at home this year, after being not that decidedly last year, and really for a lot of their history, actually. So that has been good to see the vibe improving at York Lions Stadium. So that's always good. Anyway, moving up the table now to, that'll be Cavalry. Is that right?
That is correct.
It certainly is. It certainly is. It took me a second because I didn't have the standings open in front of me at the time. However, yes, Cavalry FC, the hottest team in the CPL in many respects. In August, they unbeaten in the entire month. They had a 5-game winning streak that started at the end of July, unable to see out a perfect August with that draw against Valor. Came very close to it, but not quite. And they have rocketed up the table. They were in 6th for quite a long time, as recently as match week 15, jumped all the way up the table. They are in much better position now. Mitch, is this just Cavalry looking like Cavalry after not that for the first few months of the year?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, for the first few months of the year and for this entire season, like, defensively, they've been stellar. They've been better even this year defensively than last year, and all the metrics. Conceded the fewest goals, fewest shots on target by a good amount. I think that's been really their foundation. But obviously, when you have so many attacking players either missing or not clicking on the same wavelength, which have both kind of been issues this season, then you're always, again, we've talked about it with Pacific, we've talked about it with so many other clubs. Like, you need the goals to go along with strong defensive performances. So once they started getting those goals, like, you were always bound to go on a run like this, and we're starting to see them get those now. Obviously, staying healthy is going to be a big thing. Mile Henry just announcing that he's out for the season. William Akio already out. Tobias Warshevsky has missed the last few. So they're going to need other guys to step up and make sure that, Ali Musi, Lowell Wright, like, some of these guys are able to stay healthy through the end of the year. But again, it's been an incredible run for them recently, and it doesn't really show any signs of slowing down. And something Tommy Wheeldon Jr. has mentioned a lot about this Cavalry team this season is, in the way that they played earlier in all of those matches where goals were so valuable and they had to really, they weren't scoring 2, so they needed to shut up shop if they were scoring 1. Like, those are the kind of games that kind of take place over this last round of matches in the regular season and going into the playoffs as well. And they're really a team built for those 1-goal tight, cagey games where, they can get their moment of magic and then they can deny the other team. So, with the exception maybe of, like you mentioned, the set piece madness against Valor, this is a team just built for those final months of the season. And I think they're in a really good spot right now to go on and really push these top teams. And if not, find themselves in a great spot heading into a playoff season that they will be desperate to, finally win that CPL final.
Yeah, I mean, we saw it last year. They fully pulled away in the last month and a half of the season, ended up winning the league by 13 points. Who knows if there's a similar story in store here. But I mean, you mentioned a few names, and I think one of the keys for Cavalry and going on this run is simply just that their best players have been on the pitch more. Ali Musi, obviously, we've spoken about him a ton, but as soon as he came back off the bench in that Ottawa game, scored twice. He's been excellent ever since for them. Even Bradley Camden, I think, has been underratedly very, very good for Cavalry after he missed some time with injury. And these players coming back is making the players that have been there the whole time better. Dan Klomp looks better with Eric Cobbs next to him again. Fraser Aird looks better with Ali Musi in front of him. And it's hard for him to look much better because he has already been, he'd probably been their best player so far this season, Fraser Aird. He's been outstanding at all times. But when you see them with those players that they click with, Musi and Fraser Aird, Tommy Wheeldon Jr. called them the best duo in the CPL on Friday night. And I don't think he's wrong about that. He also mentioned that Sergio Camargo coming in there, though. Him and Musi also have an incredible connection and did in that game as well. And Camargo a little bit, maybe not quite fully up to speed to the same level as Musi and Aird at the moment because he's been in and out of the lineup with injury. But if he's healthy now and he's coming in, he's continuing to click, things looking better in Cavalry, especially with Camargo able to slot right back into that spot where Mile Henry, unfortunately, is going to miss out. But keep an eye on Cavalry in the next few weeks because their next 3 games are against the other 3 teams in the top 4. They're away at Forge on Saturday. That's going to be a huge game for both teams. Then they host Atletico Ottawa, and then it's back to Ontario on Friday, September 20th, to play against York United. So the title race could take some major turns over the next few weeks to begin September. But we move on and upward in the title race. Atletico Ottawa. Mitch, this was a team that everybody had their eye on to begin the year. They were the super team by some reckonings. They had so many new big name CPL established stars come into the team, and they're in second place. What do you make of Atletico Ottawa? Is it kind of hard to gauge? They were in first place for a long time. Now they're kind of in this battle. Sometimes they show some of this super team energy. Sometimes they're a little bit more frustrated and they sometimes just aren't scoring as much as I think they should be. But Mitch, what have you made of Atletico Ottawa's first 3 quarters of this season?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, they were so far above the rest for the first few months of the season that, you wonder if a bit of complacency or, I guess just struggle to evolve kind of sets in over the last little bit. And again, something we've been tracking since the start of the season is they've been conceding a lot of goals, even in those games that they were winning early in the year. And then finally that catches up with them over a really tough stretch. I think previous to this past 4 games, they conceded 13 in 4 games. And obviously you're not going to have many wins if you do that. Even if you're Atletico Ottawa, you aren't outscoring that many goals against. I think Ilias Iliadis has come in and been a tremendous addition and not a way we were expecting as adding to a back 3 and kind of fixing their defensive issues. And, since he's come in, they've been tremendous defensively and really, kind of, I think, single goal out in their past 3, kind of shifted things around. I think that there's another gear still with this team, though. you look at guys like Ollie Bassett, Balou Tabla, Manny Aparicio, players who we know are tremendous in this league, but really haven't been at their best over the past few months. And they're still 2 points off the top of the table with those players not going at their best. So there's a lot to like. What I am curious, their little resurgence recently has come against some of those players that we talked about, or some of those teams that we talked about earlier in the show. Who are below that playoff line, or Vancouver FC, kind of in that bottom four. So it's going to be how they can do against those top four teams. We saw them go away to York, get beat quite badly. Their recent game against Forge, they got beat quite badly.
Yeah.
Can they now turn things around and get some of these big results against these top teams that are going to be the difference makers in this title race? That's the big question for me with this Atletico Ottawa side in terms of title contenders. But, it's clear that they're going to be up there, I think, towards the end of the season, just based on the talent that they do have.
Yeah, I think that is what's going to carry them through. As you mentioned, Iliad is a game changer. I think unexpectedly so. We saw him last year with this team on loan, and he was a good player, but maybe not a huge difference maker for them at times. Certainly not nailed on in the starting 11. But I guess another year of training at CF Montreal, playing a couple of games, has kind of turned him into this sort of defensive. He can play in this back three. He's been very good. Apparently, he's spent a lot of the year working on his corner deliveries straight to the back of the net, because he's done that twice. But something that strikes me with Ottawa, we've spoken about a couple of teams that have been very consistent in their lineup in the last few weeks and the players they have on the pitch. Ottawa less so, I think. I want to know your thoughts on this, Mitchell, and whether that's a good or a bad thing. They're obviously a team with depth, but we've seen quite a few changes in not just personnel but also shape on the pitch. Balou Tabla has been on the bench the last 3 games. Obviously, Chris Twardek's been hurt for the last 3 games, but he was in and out. Abubakar Sissoko. I know Ollie Bassett. Obviously we know how good he can be and how good he was the last 2 years for Ottawa. As you mentioned, a bit of a down year, but also I don't think he's played the same position like any 2 games in a row, really, which I think has been tough for him and made it hard for him to find a rhythm personally. So what do you make of that? Do you think it's a good thing that they've got so much depth and they're able to make so many changes, or do you think it's maybe time in the last quarter of the season for Carlos Gonzalez to settle on what he wants his team to look like when it comes to crunch time?
Yeah, I think I definitely veer towards the latter of those 2 points, because this is a team with a ton of talent, but you almost have to figure out what kind of identity you want over the last few. And obviously, this is a league about teams playing each other for the 4th time now, and trying to kind of catch them off guard. But at the same time, you can go too far the other way. And if your own players don't know what to expect or exactly what they're doing on any given game day, then that's going to create just as many, if not more, problems than, the opposition. And we look at a team like Forge and Cavalry, who have really, dominated over the league, and they have kind of consistent identities and personnel, and then they build little tactical tweaks off of those things. Usually that's usually how they approach games. And I think with Ottawa and a lot of these key players, there's been just so much movement around them, and with their specific roles as well, that it's been tricky for them to find that consistency and find that best form. And again, depth is one thing, but you need to make some hard decisions and figure out who are going to be your guys to carry you towards that. And if you're Atletico Ottawa, for me, you almost consider these last few games like a title chase playoffs. And if these were playoff games, which of these guys are you putting into the starting 11? Like, don't worry about next week. Don't worry about kind of the weeks to come. It's who is your best 11 right now in their most comfortable positions. Let's roll this lineup out and try and get as many of these points as we can, because again, they're right there. They're absolutely right there in this title race, and it's there for the taking for them.
Very quickly to wrap us up with Ottawa, I have one question. Obviously, it's a team with so many big names, so much talent. If we were to get to the end of the season here, is there a player in this Ottawa team that would be in the player of the year conversation? I mean, I feel like a team that finishes first or second, you'd expect there to be one. who is that guy at the moment? I'm not sure. Is it Manny Aparicio? Maybe.
I think Manny's the closest, but again, it's been a bit of a quiet season from him statistically in terms of certainly, the goals and assists and goal contributions. Ruben Del Campo obviously up there in the Golden Boot race, but he's a player that maybe doesn't, he doesn't have the assists in the same way maybe a Brian Wright would if you're looking at it comparable. So I think that's a fair point that, there's been so many guys on this Ottawa team that, love to have the ball and love to contribute, that maybe there hasn't been those standout contributors the way there's been on other teams. And that might be another bit of an issue. And, you have to really figure out over the last little bit who are going to be those players to step up and be the difference makers.
Yeah, not necessarily a bad thing to have a committee of talented players, but just something I thought of, maybe a little bit unusual for a team that is so clearly a title contender. Up to the top of the table, though, the last team that we're going to talk about today, Forge Football Club. They're out in front. They've got some breathing room as well now after a few very strong performances in a row, beating Pacific on Friday night. Mitch, Forge are just Forge again, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, they really are. I mean, obviously, the big thing for them this season is 9 wins at home now, which is 3 more, I believe, than any other club.
Yeah.
And 1 away from a club record, I believe, set back in 2019. And, anytime you're a Forge team and you're approaching a club record, even 5 years into the Canadian Premier League or 6 years into the Canadian Premier League's history, obviously that means you're doing something right because of the standard that they've set that's so high. And I mean, they've just been scoring in a way that is, better than any other team in the league, and not by accident. They're getting the most shots on target, second most in touches in the opposition box, clinical and consistent in how they've created and finished chances, regardless of who's the one putting the ball in the back of the net. I think the biggest question for them going into these final, 7 matches for them is who's going to lead the line. Obviously, with Kwesi Poku departing at kind of an inopportune time of the year. But the good news for Forge is that they're scoring their way through this problem right now. Again, it's something that long-term I think they're going to want to address, but it's always been a Forge team that, like, over their history, doesn't rely specifically on the number 9 to be their constant goal scorer. Like last year, we saw Woobin Spacias, Taron Campbell score. Certainly, they were in the Golden Boot race, but they weren't consistently scoring or at the same time or anything like that. And obviously, Campbell's here again. Jordan Hamilton is there. They would want more from one of those 2 players, but right now they're getting contributions from so many other guys that it hasn't proven to be an issue yet, but it could be. That's the only thing right now you can really truly, for me, point to this Forge team and be incredibly concerned about. Obviously, away form still, they're going to need to get some big away results towards the end of this year if they want to stay at the top of the table. But now, again, another team that is fully focused now and will be incredibly hungry to get that CONCACAF spot that comes with winning the CPL regular season that they missed out on in the Canadian Championship. So Forge is going to be a tough team to pass at this point for me.
Yeah, they certainly are. And I mean, you mentioned Kwesi Poku being gone. Bobby Smirniotis gets asked about him every week. And he's like, we scored 2 goals in, I think, 3 of the 4 CPL games they've played without him now. Exactly. The only one they didn't being that 0-0 against York, which I think we're all going to try and forget about very quickly because it was awful to watch. But otherwise, they have been okay. And they've always been, as you mentioned, a team that kind of scores by committee. Tristan Borges, David Chouanier, Benny Badibanga. Noah Jensen was in on the fun on Friday night at home. And that was very impressive. Shout out to him wearing the armband. Still haven't gotten to the bottom of why Noah Jensen was the captain that night, with maybe the more expected option being Alex Ashinodi-Johnson. We'll try and get to the bottom of that. We being 2 incredibly intrepid and talented journalists. But otherwise, obviously, a wealth of riches at Forge. And speaking of their midfield, I mean, Ali Hajabrapor has taken a huge, he takes a step forward every year. But honestly, for me, if the season ended today, he might be my player of the year. He has been outstanding in that Forge midfield, and certainly a very, very impressive young Canadian player. But anyway, Forge, Mitch, let's just look at this run-in for them. 3 home games left. We know that their away form has not been great, but they go to Halifax, Vancouver, Valor, and Pacific. So that's the bottom 4 teams are all their away games. Do you think that maybe things are shaping up for Forge to maybe end up holding on to this first place spot?
I think those could be, but obviously we've mentioned like these games will be just as meaningful for those teams at the bottom as they will be for the teams at the top, right?
If not more so.
Yeah, exactly. So you look at those, you look at those games, and you're going into places where those teams will be absolutely desperate for any points that they can claw away from a team, at the top of the table and make up on those around them. So yeah, these are, again, no team has an easy run in. That's why this is so incredibly exciting. And yeah, and they're all long trips too. Like that's the thing is like, these aren't, you're not going into Ontario again this year. You're not, you're going across the country. And, I think we've seen Forge maybe struggle with that a little bit more than usual this season with those long trips. So it's going to be a fascinating run in. And again, you're going to need to be at your very best in these games, even if you're Forge, because teams love beating any club in this league, but they love beating Forge more than anyone else. And
it does have to be said, Vancouver and Valor both been very, very tricky opponents for Forge. I mean, Valor especially, kind of their bogey team. Princess Auto Stadium is kind of a nightmare zone at times for Forge. So it certainly could be very, very interesting games down the stretch. We've made it to the top of the table. It is a nice view from up there, I'm sure, for Forge, but not completely stable, with a quarter of the season left to go for them. 6 weeks, but that begins this weekend. Producer Benedict, can we get the schedule up there for this week? We begin on Friday night in Vancouver. Vancouver FC taking on York United, followed by a doubleheader on Saturday. Forge FC, Cavalry FC at Tim Hortons Field, Pacific FC, Halifax Wanderers at Starlight Stadium, and then Monday night, not Sunday, Monday night at Princess Auto Stadium in Winnipeg. We've got a rare kind of Monday night game, Valor FC hosting Atletico Ottawa in another very interesting one. That should be a lot of fun. Obviously, as we mentioned, of all of these games, massive, massive implications for every single team. We've also got Canadian national team coming up this weekend. There's Canada, USA on Saturday. That'll kickoffs at 4 Eastern, I believe. Yeah. So the OneSoccer broadcast, we go straight from that into the Forge Cavalry game and then straight into Pacific Halifax. So a very, very fun day of soccer all afternoon. If you are able to watch, I'll probably be watching all of them. It'll be great. You all should too, on OneSoccer or Fubo or TELUS Channel 980. Thank you very, very much for joining us again this week. I know our schedule has been a little bit inconsistent with the podcast. That might not change. Obviously, next week being a weird match week, I think look for us sometime next week. Hopefully, we will see. But in the last few weeks of the season, we will get back to our more consistent schedule, I promise. But thank you very much for sticking with us. If you had, Mitchell Tierney, thank you very, very much for joining us on air here. Always a pleasure. Thank you, Volkswagen, of course, for helping us to do this by being the title sponsor of the CPL Newsroom. And we will see you sometime. Until then.
Pacific, no shot able to come away. Jensen wants to change it. Noah Jensen with a missile will open the scoring here. Jensen, known to drop the hammer from distance.